Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Consumer Action webinar, Collaborating for Consumers, Working Together to Stop Scams. My name is Nelson Santiago, and I am a Community Outreach Manager with Consumer Action, and I am thrilled that you are all joining us today. We are offering the webinar today in recognition and in celebration of National Consumer Protection Week. This is an annual event that's organized by the Federal Trade Commission, and we'll hear a little bit more about it from our speakers today from the Federal Trade Commission in just a couple of minutes. I did want to say up front that part of the objectives for today's webinar are not only to learn about the scams that are currently affecting consumers and also how consumers can protect themselves, but also to get a better understanding of what law enforcement and investigative agencies are doing to fight fraud and protect consumers, as well as what private nonprofits and private corporations are doing to protect consumers as well. And we are hoping that we can all discuss ways or consider different ways that we can collaborate more to protect the communities we serve. Before moving into the program, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge and thank our sponsor. This webinar is presented thanks to the support we received from Amazon, and we are very thankful for many years of support and partnership in protecting consumers. So thanks very much for that. Now, before moving into the program, if any of you happen to be new to Consumer Action, I do want to let you know how you can find us online. You can see a screenshot from our website here, and on the lower right, you can see the URL. You can find a lot of resources to help protect consumers from fraud right on our website, right from our homepage. To the right side, you can see the Scamgram newsletter button. It's a bright green color there. This comes out once a month, and most of you who are on the webinar today will receive it the next time it comes out. But you can also click on that button anytime and read our past issues. If you're putting on a webinar or a workshop on scams, you'll find a lot of recent scams that we have rounded up and that we round up every month. Also, on the lower right of our homepage, you can see the quick menu where you can select publications by category, as well as training modules, many of which discuss consumer scams and also include, for example, a module on protecting consumers from scams that it's basically a downloadable workshop that you can tailor to fit the needs of your clients. So that's available right on our website. Now, moving into the program, because we have a jam-packed program to offer you today, I want to let you know who's going to be joining us. First, we're going to be hearing from Emma from the Federal Trade Commission. We have joining us Emma Fletcher, who is a senior data researcher with the Division of Consumer Response and Operations at the FTC, where she focuses on projects at the intersection of data analysis and consumer education. And she authors the FTC's Consumer Data Spotlight publications, where she explores trends seen in reports that are made to the FTC's Consumer Sentinel Network. Also with the FTC, joining us for the first segment is Rhonda Perkins, who is an attorney in the Division of Marketing Practices in the Federal Trade Commission's Bureau of Consumer Protection. She has investigated and litigated cases involving telemarketing and business opportunity fraud, credit repair and government imposter scams, deceptive marketing of rental listings, and deceptive marketing of investment seminars. Ms. Perkins also works to combat fraud in low-income and underserved communities as part of the agency's Every Community team. We are so glad that you are on FTC team and can't wait to hear from you. We will also hear today from Michael Rodan, who is a supervisory special agent with the FBI. I'll tell you a little bit more about him in a little while. We also have Kathy Stokes. She's with AARP, and we have Tom Olson, Corporate Counsel, Consumer Protection and Enforcement with Amazon. So I'll let you know a little bit more about these speakers when we move into their segments. Now, Emma, I'm going to go ahead and advance the slides and let me know, speakers, when you need your slides advanced, and we can get started with your section, Emma and Rhonda.
Great, thank you so much, Nelson. As Nelson said, I'm Rhonda Perkins, and I'm here with my colleague, Emma Fletcher. and we're excited to be with you today from the Federal Trade Commission to talk about some of the most reported scams we see and how we can work together to fight against them. And the views Emma and I express today are our own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Commission or any commissioner. Next slide, please. Thank you. So first, let me tell you a little bit about the FTC. As the nation's leading consumer protection agency, the FTC works to stop fraud and unfair business practices. We're primarily a law enforcement agency, only civil, don't send anyone to jail. But part of what we do is file cases in federal court to stop businesses engaged in fraud and try to get money back to people who were ripped off. And through education and outreach, the FTC tells people about their rights. And we also collaborate with trusted organizations like Consumer Action to reach broader audiences. And during National Consumer Protection Week, and really any time of the year, consumer protection agencies, law enforcement, and consumer advocates work together to help people learn to spot, report, and avoid scams. Next slide, please. So we'll start with scams people report most often to the FTC. Then we'll talk about a few particular scams and how and why people should report them. And finally, we'll talk about free resources and how we can work together to fight fraud. And now I will pass it to Emma.
All right, thank you, Rhonda. Great to be here today to share what we're seeing in the reporting data to the FTC. I'm going to be talking about what consumers are telling us, specifically what they're telling us about the scams that they're experiencing. Next slide, please. Thank you. So first, I'll give you a little background on the data that I'll be sharing. Each year, the FTC collects millions of reports from the public about scams. A large share of these reports come to us directly on our reporting site, reportfraud.ftc.gov, which you can see here. We also get reports through our call center, and we take in reports that are collected by our data contributors. There are about 50 contributors. These include many state AGs, the Better Business Bureau, AARP, Western Union, and some other companies as well. Really many different organizations and agencies are pooling reports in our Consumer Sentinel database. And this is a tool used by the FTC and by other law enforcement agencies for investigations. We also use the data to track trends and to understand how scams work. And we do this so that we can warn the public, as in this presentation today. Next slide, please. So let's start by looking at the big picture numbers for last year. We received about 2.6 million fraud reports last year. About 38% of these reports indicated that money was lost. Another 62% were reports by people who had been targeted by a scam but were able to avoid a loss. So many of those people also report. And the median loss was just shy of $500. But of course, many people report losing a lot more than that. And remember that since most people don't report fraud, we estimate it's less than 5%. This $12.5 billion figure is just the tip of the iceberg. We recently estimated that the true cost of fraud may be as high as $158 billion. So this is a huge problem, and what we'll be discussing today is, as I said, just the tip of the iceberg. It's what people are reporting to us. And before I go on, I should also just mention that this is a bit of a sneak peek because our annual data book, which goes into the details on the frauds we saw in the previous year, it's not out yet. So you're getting an early peek at what those numbers look like. Next page, please. So let's look at the fraud numbers over time. Looking at the blue line, you can see that the number of reports has been remarkably flat for the past 3 years, 2.6 million every year since 2022. But the red line shows the reported losses, and those losses just keep going up. They've really skyrocketed from about 3.5 billion in 2020 up to the 12.5 billion last year. And this is related to the fact that more people are reporting extremely large loss amounts. People are losing tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of dollars, even occasionally $1 million or more. And this is because many scams today are really designed to take everything that a person has. People empty out their accounts. So this is a really, really concerning trend. Next slide, please. So let's look at the top fraud subcategories. Looking at the gray bars on the left, you can see that business impersonation, online shopping, and government impersonation are the most frequently reported scams. Note that the losses shown on the right by the green bars show that investment scams really jump off the page. We are seeing enormous losses to scams involving investment. These are not losses by people who invested and didn't get the returns they expected, or their investment went down in value. They're people who invested in a complete scam. They were never going to get any money back. They simply believed that they were investing. There are fake websites that are set up where people send money that they simply don't get back. And this is driving or helping to drive the upward trend in losses that we see. And Rhonda will share more about how some of these scams work a little later on. Next slide, please. So we also collect information about how the scams start. And when we look at the loss reports, this is excluding all of the reports where people did not experience a loss. When we look at those loss reports, we see that social media scams are reported more than any other type. Scams that start with some sort of contact, whether it's an ad or a message or some sort of contact on social media. Also, the overall reported losses are far higher on social media scams than on any other contact method. And many of these scams are actually the investment scams that I mentioned earlier. So a lot of those are starting out on social media, often people going to social media looking for investment advice, and they kind of fall into the laps of a scammer who will lure them to one of these fake websites. We also do see a lot of online shopping scams that start on social media. Often people will see an ad, they click to buy something, and then they simply never get what they ordered. But to be clear, phone scams are still a huge problem, especially for older adults, as are the emails and texts. Many of the scams that impersonate businesses and government agencies start out with a phone call or an email or a text. Next slide, please. We also collect details on how people lost their money, basically the payment method that they used. And credit cards are the #1 payment method in terms of the number of reports. And these credit card payments are typically on online shopping scams. Again, people buying something and they simply never get what they ordered. That's sort of the typical scenario, or they get something really that does not resemble what they ordered. It's really important for consumers to know that they do have the option to dispute the charges with their credit card company. But looking at the right, you can see that we have huge losses reported on bank transfers and also cryptocurrency. These are by far our top 2 payment methods, and most of these losses are on the investment scams. But you also do see crypto and bank transfers on impersonation scams. For example, many consumers have reported loading cash into Bitcoin ATM machines. They typically believe that by putting their money into these machines, they are somehow protecting it from some sort of security problem. And when they're doing this, they often believe they're talking to someone at their bank or to a government agency. So we're seeing a lot more of that, unfortunately. Next slide, please. So we also collect details about age. We ask consumers to let us know their age range. And people are always interested in the age data. Many people believe that scams are mostly a problem for older adults. And of course, that's certainly not the case. But we do see some important differences between older and younger adults in the experiences that they report. So it is important to be aware of some of that. Next page, please. First, compared to younger adults, older adults are far more likely to report that the scam started with a phone call. And this is especially true for people 80 and over. They really stand out on the phone scams. Also, older adults are much more likely to say that they paid by giving the numbers on the back of a gift card. Many of you have probably heard of the scams where people drive around going to different stores, buying gift cards, giving the numbers on the back. That's still going on, unfortunately, and it disproportionately affects older adults. That particular combination of a phone call followed by a gift card payment, that's very commonly reported by older adults. And it invariably involves the impersonation of a business or a government agency or even a family member. You probably heard of the so-called grandparent scam. And finally, older adults have much higher median losses. And that, again, is especially true for the people who report who are 80 and over. So that's a real concern. Typically, their losses are several times higher than the younger adults. So while we're actually a little less likely to see reports of older adults losing money to scams, when they do report a loss, their losses tend to be much higher. Next page, please. So let's look at the data from younger adults. They are more likely than older adults to report scams that start on social media. To be clear, social media is the top contact method for all age groups, but it is more commonly reported by younger people. Also, they're more likely to report online shopping scams, investment scams, and they're more likely to report job scams. Next slide, please. So we do have some resources that you all may be interested in that touch on data and research. First, we have some interactive dashboards that we call Explore Data. They kind of put you in the driver's seat, give you a chance to poke around in our aggregate reporting data. And these dashboards are updated quarterly. We should have the final quarter of 2024 available soon at the same time that the data book is released. And you can find those at ftc.gov/exploredata. Second, we publish data spotlights every few months. And these spotlights go deeper on particular topics. For example, the most recent spotlight digs into what we're seeing with Bitcoin ATM machines. And finally, if you don't have time to wade through all of the academic research on scams to understand what there is to know about scam prevention messaging, we published a report that is essentially a review of the research literature. And you can find that by going to ftc.gov/olderadults and look for the Scam Prevention Research Committee tab. This was a committee project with help from many people, perhaps some of the people on this call. And I think it's a great resource if you're trying to get a handle on what the research tells us about how we can help the public avoid scams. So now I'll go ahead and pass it back to Rhonda.
Thank you, Emma. So the data tells us one part of the story, but the stories that we hear from people and what we see in our investigations tell us another part. So we're going to talk about some specific scams, and by knowing about the scams and the scammers' tactics, they're easier to spot and we can work together to fight fraud. Next slide, please. So one way to spot a scam is by looking at how someone tells you to pay. And here are some of the red flags. Anyone who says withdraw cash, wire money, or buy gold to protect your money or solve a problem is a scammer. If what you think is a legitimate business or government entity demands that you have to pay by gift card, cryptocurrency, wire transfer, Western Union, MoneyGram, don't do it. We're seeing people empty their bank accounts and retirement accounts and give it to a scammer because they think they're protecting it from criminals. And Emma mentioned that a little bit earlier, and I'm going to give you some more details. So scammers are using text and email more and more as the initial contact, but the goal is to get people on the phone in scams that involve impersonation of 2 or 3 different companies and government agencies. And scammers can make any numbers show up on your phone, so people cannot trust caller ID. In one recent example we've seen, someone will receive a fake text from, say, Amazon, asking if they authorized the payment of $1,500 for a laptop. And then when they call the number in the message to say that they didn't, the person they're speaking with says, your identity has been used to commit a serious crime, something like money laundering or drug smuggling. Then they ask them to hold so they can connect them with the Social Security Administration. Then they're connected to several fake agents from different government agencies who might give names and badge numbers. And in order to help with the case and protect their money, they'll tell the person to withdraw money and deposit it into a special government ATM that's really a Bitcoin ATM. And this is a complete and total scam. Next slide, please. And Emma mentioned it before, and I just said it, but I really want to reiterate the point for people to never put money in a Bitcoin ATM to protect their money or solve a problem. And scammers call, they text, they email, they reach out on social media, all in efforts to get people to give up their money and their sensitive information. Next slide, please. Scammers may pretend to be a well-known business. This shows a phishing email pretending to be from the Geek Squad and a tech support scam. And who has not received an email or a text saying that it's UPS or FedEx or your bank, or a call from the phone company or electric company saying service will be cut off if you don't pay a bill immediately. So one of the things that we like to stress, don't trust caller ID, but also don't click on links in an unexpected text or email. Don't call phone numbers in those texts, emails, or social media messages. And if you think it could be real and something you need to address, look at your bill, go on your own to the business's website, or look at the back of your credit card. Use that contact information to make sure you reach a safe source. Next slide, please. As Emma mentioned, we see big dollar losses with investment scams. Sometimes they involve cryptocurrency, and they may start with a message on a messaging app, something like WhatsApp, and they'll say they accidentally reached the wrong person, or they'll contact someone through social media platforms or dating apps. And some scammers, people meet online, they will flood you with attention and want to talk every day. And it may not even be romantic. It may just seem like a new friend with whom you share similar interests. But soon their focus is on money. They offer to help invest money or teach you how to make millions investing. And anyone who promises you'll grow your money in a short time with little to no risk is a scammer. And anyone saying it's a sure thing to make money investing in crypto is a scammer. And we have more information at the link on the slide at ftc.gov/investmentscams. Next slide, please. So what do you do if you've been scammed? Sometimes, no matter how careful we are, we end up paying a scammer. Scammers are skillful and convincing. Their whole job is figuring out how to talk people into giving up their money or sensitive information. And anyone can be scammed. And if that happens, the most important thing to do is to act quickly. Contact the company you used to send the money. Tell them it was a fraud and that you want their help to get your money back. And if you act as soon as you realize you paid a scammer, and depending on how you paid, you might be able to recover at least some of your money. If you can, we recommend paying by credit card. It's the most likely payment method that could enable you to get your money back. Next slide, please. So where do you report fraud? Emma mentioned this earlier, and this is really important in our fight against scams. Scammers don't just scam one person. So if you see or experience a fraud or a bad business practice, You can help protect your community by reporting it to the FTC and asking folks in your community to do the same. Every report gives the FTC a piece of the puzzle that helps us build cases for investigations. I have used many of these reports to build cases myself. It helps us stop scammers, and it helps us alert others about current trends like the data Emma talked about earlier. So in a few short steps, people can report at reportfraud.ftc.gov or in Spanish at reportefraude.ftc.gov. And to report in other languages, people can call 877-382-4357 and choose option 3 to connect with an interpreter. And we know that not everyone feels comfortable providing information to a government database, but people can report anonymously or work with an advocate or someone else who can help file a report on their behalf. It is helpful if we have someone's contact information if we need more information when building up a case. Next slide, please. So now I'll talk a little bit more about how to access helpful information and more information about fighting fraud with your community. Next slide, please. First, we have Pass It On. These education materials reinforce what people already know about spotting and avoiding fraud and gives a little more detail about different scams so people can share what they know with others. One telltale sign of a scammer is that sense of urgency they create, telling people not to talk to anyone about what they're being asked to do. And we know that when a person who's being scammed reaches out to a neighbor, friend, or family member to get that gut check, they're less likely to be scammed. And that moment of slowing down, taking your time, and talking to someone else can save thousands of dollars. And the Pass It On campaign is making sure people have the information they need to protect themselves and become a resource in their communities. And the materials have fact sheets, online articles, ready-to-go presentations that cover several topics, including what we discussed today. All of the content is in the public domain, so there's no copyright or permission needed to use it. You can share any of these articles on social media or share copies with others. And you can go to ftc.gov/bulk order for printed materials for free in English, Spanish, and some of the materials are also in other languages, and the FTC will ship them. Next slide, please. We also have consumer.gov, or in Spanish, consumidor.gov, and this provides basics written in plain and simple style. It was created for emerging readers, and there's handouts, lessons plans, videos, more information for trainers. And the topics include managing your money, credit loans and debt, and scams and identity theft. Next slide, please. We have information online in 12 languages in addition to English and Spanish at ftc.gov/languages, all free. And there's articles on how to avoid scams, what to do if you were scammed, and how to spot and report identity theft. Next slide, please. And scams are always changing. Scammers are sophisticated, and knowing about the latest scams really helps people to defend themselves and help folks in their communities. And you can keep up with the latest with the alerts that you see here on the screen. And you can share this information with others. So we hope that we can work together to stay ahead of scammers and share what we know with our communities. Final slide, please. And thank you so much for your time. Thank you to Consumer Action for inviting us. And if you have any questions about the resources or what else we can do to work together, please reach out to us.
Thank you so much, Emma and Rhonda, for the great presentation and wonderful slides. And I forgot to mention that due to a technical issue, Emma and Rhonda are going to be off camera, but they prepared this wonderful deck for us, and we heard you loud and clear with some of this great advice. So thanks so much. We'll be moving on to our next speaker now. Our speaker is Michael Roldan. He's a supervisory special agent with the FBI, and he has worked there nearly 17 years at the FBI in public corruption, environmental, violent crime, human trafficking, healthcare fraud, and financial crimes. Michael is currently also the program coordinator for elder fraud and healthcare fraud for the San Francisco division of the FBI. We feel really lucky that you are here, Michael. I'll advance to a couple of your slides that you prepared. One thing I want to tell everyone about Michael is that he's going to have to leave us before the webinar ends. So right after his presentation, if you have questions for Michael, please type them into the Q&A function, and we will address them before Michael has to leave. So thanks so much. Michael, if you're on, would you go ahead?
Yeah, thank you for having me. That was a great presentation that we just had, and I'm going to try to give some examples that I've heard I'm not going to repeat what they've already said, but I'm going to try to give some examples for that and some other reporting mechanisms. So as far as cryptocurrency scams, they target everybody in different communities, even financial professionals. So recently I was given a report from an individual who sold a certain type of financial product, annuities, and they fell victim to a cryptocurrency scam because a subject reached out to them and said they were interested in purchasing a large annuity. Now, this financial professional was at first very suspicious of this person, but was also tempted of the large potential commission. So the commission in a multi-million-dollar annuity would be between $20,000 and $40,000. So this subject knew the jargon, knew the common language used in this industry. So it alleviated this person's fears. And unfortunately, the subject, as common in cryptocurrency scams, had the victim switch over to a common messaging app. They then went back and forth on how the subject made their money, and then the topic of cryptocurrency came up. The subject then had the victim download an app which looked just like a normal cryptocurrency app that there's tons of them out there online, but the bad guys were actually in control of this app. It made it look like the victim was making money, but they really weren't. So in addition to having that malicious app, the subjects have the victim download a legitimate app so that they can put money in that legitimate app and then transfer it to the malicious app. So on the malicious app, it'll make it look like the person's making a ton of money, but they're really not. And sometimes in order to convince the victim to put more money in, what they do is they'll allow the victim to take some of the money out. And some of these, and just to say, a lot of these apps, even after a phone has been wiped, the malware is still present on the phone. So just be really careful about that. The only reason why this financial professional found out that this was a scam was because she started to tell other friends about this and wanted to get them involved. And then their friends sent them YouTube videos on pig butchering and things like that. And that's how they realized they'd been scammed. Now, this person probably lost about $20,000, but in my experience, the losses have been in the millions. So really be on the lookout for those. Another big scam where people lose a lot of money is escrow-related business email compromise. So this is when scammers are they impersonate a title company and closing and wiring instructions. So how the scammers get access to this is by sending emails targeting the real estate sector. And sometimes they just do this by mass emails. And the subjects rely on victims clicking on malware-laden emails and links in emails. And at that point, the subjects have access to the emails and closing information and information like that. So be really careful of the links that you click on here. Now, if you do fall victim to this and fall victim to a false wiring instruction and you realize that you've been scammed, make sure you contact your bank right away and tell them that it was fraudulent. And then also report this on ic3.gov. If you can do this immediately, there's a good chance of getting some of the money back. The FBI has relationships with banks, and they have it's called the Recovery Asset Team, the RAT team, and there's a good chance of getting some of the money back. Even for there are relationships with international banks as well There's no guarantee, but do this as quickly as possible. Once again, contact your financial institution, let them know that it was fraudulent, and then report it on ic3.gov. I'm also going to mention some scams which that utilize AI. So scammers use large language models and AI to write malware. They also use it for credential harvesting. The bad guys can use LLMs to craft highly convincing phishing emails or fake websites that trick victims into revealing their credentials. So be really careful about this. Also, for phishing and social engineering, they use AI to craft more sophisticated conversations and things like that. So be really careful of that as well. There's also an example of a company overseas. I believe it was lost about $20 to $25 million because a scammer created a very realistic looking video, which even had coworkers walking around in the background, and transferred $20 to $25 million based on this video. So now I'm going to talk about skimming schemes. So fraudsters will set up devices on bank ATMs or at gas stations, and then they'll set up hidden cameras in order to get your PIN number. So something you can do to help with that is to make sure you cover your PIN number when you're entering it. They also use overlays on the keypads, so be careful of that. So just be on the lookout for damage, residue, things like that. Go inside the bank if you can. Go inside the gas station and pay if you can. If you do use pumps outside, try to use the pumps that are more visible to the cashier, so those are less likely to be messed with. So as far as AI, for some of the scams that were mentioned, they can be used to impersonate voices as well, and can enhance some of the scams, like the grandparent scam and things like that. Before, for some of the grandparent scams, one example that I can mention, they just had screaming in the background, but now they can utilize voices that they've gotten from online. So it's another thing to be on the lookout for, is be careful about what you post online. Warn your family members about what they post online, because these things can be used against them. About how much time do I have left?
You have about 6 minutes, 7 minutes.
Do you want me to do questions now, or do you want me to talk a little bit more?
Go ahead and tell us the rest of your presentation, then we'll move to questions for a couple minutes.
Sounds good. Thank you. Yeah, so I'll give an example of another fraud. It was involving real estate. So the subjects in this case actually use insiders to gain personal identifying information. So the subject in this case had a friend or a co-conspirator who worked at a car dealership. And you know, at car dealerships, you provide much of your personal information, including your social, so that they can check your credit. So the subjects in this case got information from these car dealership, and they used that to take out mortgage loans in the victims' names. The reason why one of the victims found out about this scam was because they received a letter saying that the trust had changed or something to that effect because of what the scammers had done. They also enlisted the help of lower level criminals who posed as the individuals. They used fake IDs so that they could get the documents notarized. So that's how the case came about. It was a referral from local law enforcement in the Bay Area. It was actually a very successful case. There were seven individuals indicted. 6 members have been sentenced as much as 9 years in prison. So it was a very successful case. There were millions of dollars which were recovered. Unfortunately, some of it was, at least most of the victims were made whole again. I believe it was about $3 to $4 million, and very successful case and very good example of collaboration with our local law enforcement partners. And I'll give another example about the importance of the relationship with the private sector. There was about a $100 to $150 million fraud at a neighboring FBI office, and they called to see if we had a good relationship with a certain large-scale cryptocurrency company, and we did have a great relationship with them. We were told about the fraud, and I made sure that the two sides communicated, all the information was exchanged, and it took a long time. It took nearly a year, but the money was all recovered, and it took a lot to get that money back. But it was a good example of how the relationships with the private sector can have a good result. I can take questions now.
Yes, Monica, can you tell us if there are any questions for Michael?
Yes, of course there are. All sorts of good questions for him. We'll start with consumers are typically advised to report scams. But does the FBI really want to hear about every scam email I get? Or do you only want to hear from me if I've lost money or data to a scam? Like what should I report to the FBI directly, and what shouldn't I?
I'd err on the side of any internet related crime to reporting it. If it's something like you get a scam text or a scam call, I mean, I would block those. But if you do see something that you feel is serious, and for example, if you go on ic3.gov, that also has just like the many websites that the FTC gave, it also will have many of the scams that the FBI is observing and seeing people fall victim to. So if you think there's something that would fall into that category, I'd encourage you to file a report.
Okay.
With IC3.
Yeah. Sometimes it would help scam victims to have proof of their actual monetary losses. For example, for the IRS, in the case of lost retirement account savings, it might help to be able to, give something to the IRS showing that it was actually fraud and not a withdrawal. Would the FBI provide a letter or something else that a scam victim could present as verification that they lost a particular amount of money in a scam, for a scam that you have confirmed and investigated?
So unfortunately, with the IC3, I don't believe that there is that option. But if you make a report also with the jurisdiction where you live, with the local jurisdiction, they probably could give you a report number. There is no, we can't, without tracing and things like that, without cryptocurrency tracing or financial analysis and things like that, we wouldn't be able to say, hey, this person lost this amount. So that would we don't have that option.
Okay, but this has actually come up a couple times from people asking, you do recommend that people report it to local law enforcement, right?
Yes, in addition, in your jurisdiction, I would recommend it. And as many of the people online, that's why we're having this, is really just trying to prevent these crimes from happening. But there is a very small chance that if you do report it, you might be able to get some of your money back. A lot of what law enforcement and the private sector are doing, they're focusing on potentially larger larger seizures by working with other law enforcement and the private sector. And sometimes we're able to backtrace and find victims. So
Mhm.
if you don't report some of these, especially the cryptocurrency, the larger scale scams, if you don't report that you're a victim, it'll be a lot harder to find those people. So even though it's only a small chance, there still is a chance, and there has been money recovered for victims.
Okay, thanks. We have a question about AI, which you mentioned, and it's that, for a long time, one of the telltale signs of a phishing email, purporting to be from some business that you think is legitimate, is the messy writing. So typos, wrong or missing punctuation, strange wording, all of that. And you could tell this is obviously not from a legitimate business. But are you seeing that AI is now doing away with that as a warning sign? Are phishing emails and things now so sophisticated and well written that they're actually harder to spot as scams now?
That's right. It does make it a lot harder to spot from messy writing, because they're a lot better at it now with the use of AI. So it's just really that much more important to take time and to not fall victim to these types of scams. There is no rush. Like I was mentioning earlier about the real estate. I mean, this is a lot of times when you're dealing with all the money you have in the world. A lot of people, sometimes the down payment is everything that they have, or their retirement account. Take the time, call family members, trusted friends, trusted family members, and ask them, what does this sound like to you? And then sometimes people have their blinders on, and they're not looking at it because maybe the person that's scamming them is somebody they feel like is their friend. For example, there was somebody, it was a wrong text. It said, "Hey, when is golf?" They must have researched this person and found out that they loved golf. And a few months later, they lost $3 million or something around there. So just really take that time, like the FTC presenters mentioned, take that time. If there's urgency, don't do anything. Call your trusted friends.
Yeah, really important advice. So you've described all these things that the FBI does to help protect us and investigate and allow us to report things. And one writer wanted to know, are any of these protections for consumers at risk from the federal funding cuts?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
Sorry. These protections are really important. I mean, people are losing everything they have, so it's really important.
Yeah. Nelson, are we out of time?
Yeah, we do need to move on. And Michael, please stay on as long as possible as you can. We have a couple of great presenters. I know you will be leaving early though, so I'll thank you now for the great presentation. These incredibly useful tips you provided us that we can share when we go out and educate the community. That's who's on here. We have several hundred community organizations that are on here today. And I did on the screen, you can see the brochures, a couple of publications that Michael recommended, and you will get a copy of this deck so that you can get to the different materials that are being recommended here. And I'll go ahead and move us to our next speaker. We have Kathy Stokes, who is the Director of Fraud Prevention Programs with AARP, AARP's Fraud Watch Network. She leads AARP's social mission work to educate older adults on the risks that fraud represents to their financial security. Since 2019, Kathy and her team have expanded AARP's leadership in the space by mounting a national campaign to change the narrative on how we talk about fraud victims and guiding an effort to fundamentally transform how our country addresses fraud. So very eager to learn more about that. Kathy, I'm going to advance to your first slide and let me know as you need me to advance more.
Thank you so much, Nelson. I'm really glad to be here, and you can go ahead and skip to the next slide. Just want to level set about what the FraudWatch Network is for those of you who may not be familiar. This is a free resource to anybody. You don't have to be of a certain age. You don't have to be a member of AARP. Although if you are, then your $20 or whatever it is now a year does go to support things like social mission education, like the FraudWatch Network. Anyway, our goal is sort of two sides of the same coin, but then there's like this third space that I'm going to talk about mostly today. We try on the education and prevention front through education to be where people are. We have 53 state offices around the country. They have volunteer fraud fighters that are trained to go out into community to spread the message of fraud prevention. We're up to about 650 now, and I only wrote 550, I think, last week. We also have, we do things in person, virtually, online. We have our print publications, and we have 350 digital fraud fighters. And these are people that volunteer for us that don't necessarily have the time or want to be out in community presenting, but we get together with them once a month and we share information, sort of update them on what's happening, and then they share our resources with their own social media followers. And then we have partnerships, we have partnerships with the FBI and the FTC and a whole bunch of other organizations, just try to get out there where we are. Where people are. We also have bi-weekly watchdog alerts that you can sign up for. One scam every 2 weeks, breaks it down in very simple, easy to read email or text. We have a podcast. If you're a podcast listener, get on The Perfect Scam. It is now in the top 0.1% of all downloaded podcasts. And unbelievably, we're in season 20. Last year, we had over 2 million listeners, and it is true crime, but it's from that perspective of victim impact. We also have a scam tracking map online at FraudWatch Network where you can report a scam or go out and sort of do a geographic look, what's happening in my zip code. And then the other side of the coin is victim support. Again, free to everybody. Helpline, FraudWatch Network helpline, 877-908-3360. We have 160 trained volunteers waiting for your call. If you need help determining if something is or isn't a scam, if you yourself are a victim, or if somebody you know has been or is being victimized, they can help. They'll actually talk to you through it. And then we also have a program that's super exciting for me because I see the impact at the individual level. Is small group victim support sessions, Zoom sessions, hour-long, a trained facilitator helps talk people through the emotional end of the victimization through fraud. The feeling that almost everybody has, like, how was I so stupid? You weren't. The criminals are that good. And I'm the only one that this has ever happened to. No, you're not. And here are the other 10 people who just last week experienced the same thing. Super, super helpful for people to begin their journey toward some form of emotional recovery. And again, open to everybody. Look for more information at aarp.org/fraud support. In that third space, if we go to the next one, we are really pushing. We know, yes, next one, please. We know as educators and supporters of victims that we can't educate our way out of it, and we can't support the millions of victims, right? So we need a whole of society response to fraud. That's what I'm going to be talking about today. We're leading a national narrative change to reframe fraud victimization. We're launching a new law enforcement training program. We are the founder, very excited, of a new coordination center for elder fraud. And we were working with a national effort that Aspen Institute has put together to create a national fraud strategy. And finally, we're coming up with a way that we may be able to take the education about scams up to a level that maybe might be easier for us as educators. It might be easier as people receiving the information on what to look for. And the reason we're doing it, look over on the right. Emma, I think mentioned it earlier on. $158.3 billion in 2023 left our economy to these criminals. Of that, 61.5 billion was stolen from older adults. This is the #1 crime in our country, and we as a nation should come together in every way possible to try to end this scourge. Next slide. So how much fraud is out there? You know, we mentioned that before, just to show you it's so underreported. People are ashamed. There's this sort of lack of centralized reporting. You heard before, report to the FTC, report to IC3, report to law enforcement. There's some confusion around that. And there's that sense that nothing will be done because we hear so little about victims actually recovering. So if you click Nelson, you'll see that theft through fraud in 2023 was reported at 10.4 billion from the FTC, but then we saw 12.5 billion from IC3, which is the FBI's database. If you can click again, please. Remind me not to do a stacking list anymore. And then you have the next one, which is where we're talking about, yeah, it's not 10 billion, it's not 12 billion. It could be as high, FTC estimates of underreporting is 158 billion, with 61.5 billion of that, if you click one more time, is where we're seeing fraud losses from. And think about that for a minute. These are people who have worked their lives, they've saved for retirement, they're doing everything right, and if it wasn't for a fraud incident, then they would have been on their merry way in retirement, spending time with grandkids, traveling, covering their own expenses. And now, where are they? Hopefully their families are going to take care of them, and if not, it's the social safety net system, and we already know how strained and under attack those are. Next slide. And I really wanted to emphasize the importance of reporting, because if we're not reporting this crime, and I think as FTC said, maybe 5% of people report, then the rest of us aren't understanding the impact of this crime. The crime escalates. People misunderstand that this is a crime and they think it's the victim's fault. People feel blame, they feel shame, there's pain. It's a severely under-resourced problem. People end up in poverty. Sadly, we see an escalation over the last many years of a suicide among older adults. It has to be a portion of that, because one of the biggest reasons is economic instability and injustice. Next slide. So what we're doing in the narrative change space, we began in around 2021, 2022. We did a deep dive with the FINRA Investor Education Foundation on some research to look at, you know, do we really blame victims? Because it kind of sounds like we do, but we wanted to validate that. And if we do that, what's that causing and what can be done? So if you go over to aarp.org/wordsmatter, you can get to research we did, resources for professional audiences to help them understand that our words matter. Instead of saying that somebody was duped or swindled, we should be saying somebody stole their money, right? It's the criminal and the crime that we should be focusing on. And we do know that at every level of society, we blame fraud victims, but we also know from this research, we don't mean to do it. It's just our sort of knee-jerk response. We're angry, not necessarily at mom or dad or whomever experienced it, maybe at ourselves for allowing it to happen. A whole bunch of emotions going on there, but we just really need to learn to step back, understand that this person is a crime victim and they were intentionally targeted and their money's gone, and we need to show them empathy and respect, and they need to be able to retain their dignity. So aarp.org/wordsmatter. We do have one for consumers, aarp.org/saythis. Next slide. We're also working with an organization that I'm an advisor to the board on, and it's the A Path to Justice, Law Enforcement's Role in Combating Elder Fraud. We're trying to use an opportunity to train state and local law enforcement who may not have the background in fraud investigations to just at least have an introduction to what these look like, how they can work to sort of pull the strings. There's always something they can pull on the investigation, how to work with prosecutors to make sure that the investigation that they are going to undertake would actually be picked up and prosecuted. And then we also talk about the narrative change that I just talked about in the last slide and avoiding re-victimization through the language that's used. I'm really grateful to the International Association of Financial Crimes Investigators who gave us the expertise on the law enforcement angle of it. And then the part that comes in about victimization and avoiding re-victimization comes from AARP. We're going to do a train the trainer with AARP volunteers who have a law enforcement background to get it out sort of at the grassroots level. And then we'll be doing some national conferences as well. And next. And I'm really excited to announce that a new National Elder Fraud Coordination Center is going to launch in April this year. It is a member-based nonprofit, and the whole idea is to have the private sector working with each other and working with law enforcement information to look at these elder fraud cases through an organized crime lens. If you're looking at the grandparent scam that's $10,000 over here, or the tech support scam that's $11,000 over there, that doesn't mean anything to you. But you apply that organized crime lens and you start using data from private companies that are around that table and start making these cases connect. All of a sudden, you have $1 million fraud investigation that can be handed off to federal law enforcement for investigation, arrest, prosecution. It's built on a model that works out in San Diego County. This is the national version. Founding members, thank you, Amazon, Google, Walmart, and AARP. Keep an eye out. I think the launch will be mid-April. Next slide. And very quickly, this national project that the Aspen Institute has taken on to actually develop a national fraud strategy, something that's never been tried before. There are over 80 organizations that are participating. There's multiple work groups. The key areas are the thorny areas in the space: information sharing, law enforcement engagement, consumer awareness, but also warning and intervention. And what are the metrics? What are the goals that we will try to reach if we have a national fraud strategy? And you can learn more about it at that website, which you'll see when you get the deck. Next slide. And also, we have this really exciting collaboration with Amazon that we'll be talking about later this year publicly, I think. But it's basically us working together with their fraud investigations folks to figure out ways that they can communicate about the scams that are happening in Amazon's name, on their platform, through their communications channels, and support people who have experienced that. So the basic goal here was reducing the risk on impersonation scams to consumers, and then implementing some of the things that we worked together for with guidance from AARP Fraud Watch Network, measure the success of those efforts, and then share best practices across the whole ecosystem to help other online businesses combat fraud. We will be coming up with some sort of a guidebook that we're launching later this year, so you can stay tuned for that. And then I want to cover on the next slide and a couple of the next slides, I just want everybody to be grounded in why scams work. And if you've heard me talk before, you've heard me say this before, but it stands to listen to it again. Criminals have said since time immemorial, to get somebody to become a victim, you have to get them into a heightened emotional state. And they've called that for generations, getting people under the ether. It's actually a thing that happens in our brains. Scientists, academics call it the amygdala hijack. The amygdala is a part of our brain that when we are faced with a threat, our brain, which has worked the same way in this for 300,000 years, tells us, you know what, no time for logic, we just have to go to action. And so when you think about the threat that so much of this fraud happens with, you understand that like by our brains devices, we're going to action. We can't access logical thinking in this moment, which is why it's so important that we do more than just educate people about this. So that's what's happening in people's brains. And on the next slide, we've been thinking within AARP, like how do we shift people from that emotional response where our brains are wired to bypass logical thinking and move them into critical thinking, taking a pause, to allow room to reestablish that filter of logic. And I have that little flame in the corner there to remind myself that it's kind of like that idea that most of us who grew up in the United States, probably around second grade, learned what to do in the event of a fire. Stop, drop, and roll. We need a stop, drop, and roll. And if you could click once for me, the question is, what is that device, right, for fraud? Next slide. Well, fire is a pretty darn effective trigger. And there isn't just one trigger for fraud, but we think maybe for 80% of scams that are out there, there are three things that most of them come with. It's that unexpected contact. 3 o'clock in the morning, grandma, I am in so much trouble. I just drunk driving incident. The person I hit is pregnant and they think that she's going to lose the baby. And the grandma's like, oh my God, it's Jimmy. And I have to drop everything and help him. And then the urgency is, yes, grandma, but if you can send $10,000 to this lawyer, I'm going to give you the information. And then I don't have to spend tonight in jail. That's the kind of thing. The unexpected contact yields the high emotion and contains urgency. So on the next slide, what if we trained our brains, and this will take a while and we'll need consumer advocates out there and community organizations, what if we were to help people understand that those three things together are the trigger? If we can train that, then we can also train on something that we've come to learn, the active pause. Next slide. Now, an active pause isn't just a stop, don't do it. It is teaching people to take that intentional pullback. And it's taught all over in so many disciplines. For example, if you're an EMT and you show up at a site and you see a guy on the ground, you don't go, oh my God, he's having a heart attack, let me go start CPR. You take a minute and look around. What is that scene? What is the larger scene, and what do you need to center yourself to go in and address the immediate need? Same thing with aviation. Every pilot is taught that the most important focus areas are when you take off and when you land. And they are instructed to take that pause to sort of go through their inventory of what they know and understand that needs to be done. This happens in military operations all the time. So if we can teach ourselves to take, and others to take, this active, intentional, thoughtful pause, maybe we can have people disengage before they go further into the scam situation. And we're playing around with some language around it. And right now we're kind of thinking it would be pause, reflect, protect. And there's going to be more coming out on that soon. Next slide. Just wanted to throw up some resources. You'll see this when you get the slides. Fraud Watch Network, Words Matter, told you about fraud support is where you can learn more about the victim support program, and then the helpline 877-908-3360. Please share all of this far and wide. We need people educated and protected and supported if it happens to them. And that's all I have.
Thank you so much, Kathy. And I'm sure we're going to have some questions for you in a few minutes. We're going to move on to our next speaker, Tom Olson. Tom is corporate counsel with Amazon's customer protection and enforcement team, where he pursues legal action against cyber criminals who disrupt Amazon services and exploit Amazon's customers, which I'm sure we have a few Amazon customers here in our virtual room of several hundred people. Prior to joining Amazon, Tom was an officer in the Air Force Judge Advocate General Corps, where he served as the chief prosecutor for the Air Force's Western Judicial Circuit and acted as the lead counsel in the prosecution of complex courts martial around the world. Tom, thank you so much for being here today, and I'll advance your slides as you need.
Great. Well, thank you, Nelson. As Nelson mentioned, my name is Tom Wilson, and I'm an attorney with Amazon's Customer Protection Enforcement Team. And I specifically lead our external legal enforcements for scams globally. And as we've heard throughout this webinar so far, scams are a major issue that impact people of all backgrounds around the world. And we believe it's going to take, the private sector, the public sector, and consumer advocacy organizations working together to win this fight. So Amazon has an unwavering commitment to consumer safety. So I'd like to spend the next few minutes to share Amazon's approach to scam prevention in our proactive work to protect consumers. Next slide, please. So one of the most common types of scams that we face that poses a risk to consumers are impersonation or imposter scams, which you've heard referenced already, throughout the presentation. And these scams specifically are the type of scam where criminals pretend to be trusted entities that consumers expect to hear from, and whether that's private businesses or government agencies, and they contact them in various different means, which you can see here above, that can sometimes be social media, can be through email, direct mail, text messages, and oftentimes phone calls, in an effort to socially engineer them to provide personal information, or most of the time money. And the way they actually monetize these scams is through third-party payment applications, gift cards, crypto transfers, which we've heard a great deal about already today, and bank account access. Next slide. And I'd like to take just a few minutes to walk you through what the life cycle of one of these scams would be, just so we have a better idea of what we're or specifically what consumers are up against. So scammers start off by identifying a trusted entity to impersonate, and then they replicate the communication from that entity, often casting a wide net with mass communication to potential victims through whatever means they choose to use, whether that's email, text message, phone calls, robocall campaigns. And once the scammer establishes contact with their victims, and they socially engineer them to provide access to personal information or money, or oftentimes both. They then sometimes even continue to exploit victims throughout this process, again in kind of this vicious cycle, until the scams either shut down or the consumer actually runs out of money. And one point that I think is interesting to add here is that many of these scams, and we've heard this referenced a couple times, I believe Rhonda mentioned this at the beginning during the FTC presentation, is that scammers don't just use one trusted entity. Many of these scams actually involve multiple trusted entity when they're going through the entire process, and that could be the use of telecommunication services or companies to access by phone or by text, transferring to different participants in the scam and claiming that they're part of a government entity that's also trusted, or a law enforcement agency, and then also the involvement of financial institutions for payment tools or to execute transactions. So any one scam can involve multiple different companies, both private and public, when they're essentially social engineering consumers to provide money and information. All right, next slide. I think a statistic worth noting here is that the BBB estimates that 54%, and Amazon data reflects this, of consumer scams are impersonation scams, which I think reflects the overall scope of this problem and the issue that we're dealing with when we're talking about kind of the prevalence of these scams globally. And again, it's been referenced throughout this presentation, no one is immune from being, potentially victimized by this type of scam. It affects people of all ages and backgrounds and, locations. Scammers do not discriminate when it comes to who they're willing to try to victimize. Next slide. So I'd like to spend a few minutes sharing with you Amazon's approach to global scam prevention. And we've broken this down into 3 distinct pillars, and they're holding scammers accountable, ensuring consumers really know it's us, and educating consumers to avoid scams. Understanding that while each one of these is important, none of them are sufficient on their own. So next slide. So when I talk about holding scammers accountable, I'm talking about a proactive external enforcement program that goes out to actually proactively find and get accountability for the victims that have been scammed by locating in the real world scammers and working with law enforcement agencies to hold them accountable. Next slide. So at Amazon, that's what the charge of our customer protection and enforcement team is. So the customer protection and enforcement team is a team composed of lawyers, investigators, former law enforcement and prosecutors that have the charge of investigating and proactively working with law enforcement to identify and hold accountable scammers and criminals that are defrauding Amazon customers and the general public. Next slide. So a question I often get is, when we say external enforcement, what are we talking about? Well, at Amazon, our external enforcement program is comprised of several different actions. And primarily that's going to be criminal referrals, which means an actual referral to a law enforcement agency, either in the US or abroad. It could be the FBI, or for example, if we're working in another country like India, the Central Bureau of Investigation, where we proactively refer criminal cases to them and then support their investigations of scams. It could be civil litigation, and we're proactively going out there and filing civil litigation against scammers to hold them accountable and disrupt their infrastructure that they use to perpetuate the scams. Non-judicial actions in the form of cease and desist letters or takedowns, where we're trying to disrupt the actual infrastructure by taking down websites, URLs, phone numbers that are used to perpetuate the scams. And the results of those actions can come in many different forms, but the goal is ultimately always to protect consumers and get justice for victims that have been targeted by these scams. And it could be favorable judgments, injunctions, prosecution and arrests, or business disruption and dissolution, where bad actors are actually shutting down the businesses that they use to facilitate the scams. Next slide. So when we build a case for law enforcement, we aggressively investigate using a lot of different mechanisms. And just a few of them here highlighted on the screen are ones that are pretty much found in all of the different enforcement actions that we use. And oftentimes they begin with victim interviews. I'll touch upon it in a few minutes, but one of the bedrocks of our enforcement program is through victim reporting. And victim reporting is so important because specifically with impersonation scams, they occur off of our stores. And we don't really know what's going on or what challenges consumers face until they proactively report it to us. So it's so important that consumers provide us information, and I'll share with you the reporting site a little bit later in the presentation, so we can actually go out there, investigate, and speak with victims about what they're experiencing and try to build cases around that. And when we receive these customer reports, we actually use our tooling to review all of the customer reports that we receive from all over the world, and we'll choose to build cases around those that we think that we can actually find the bad actors. And we'll reach out and proactively interview victims and see if they have information that they can share with us, such as evidence like receipts and phone numbers and email addresses, text messages, that all have attributes that we can then use to further investigate. And we take those artifacts and we use tooling, both internally and externally, to investigate them and see if we can identify real world actors that are actually harming consumers. We do that through partnerships with both other industry groups like the industry traceback groups, which is able to trace back phone numbers used in scams and provide the originating provider to us so we can see if we can find out who's behind some of these robocall campaigns, or partnerships with other corporations that are also fighting the same fight that we are. For example, in 2023, we partnered with Microsoft on some call center actions in India that led to the investigation and ultimately the rating of over 70 different call centers in India that were targeting both Amazon and Microsoft customers. And we partnered with the Central Bureau of Investigation in India to proactively go out there and find those bad actors and dismantle that structure, which was a huge win for consumers. And one of the other interesting tactics that we use when we're investigating cases is actually test purchases. And by that, I mean where our outside investigators will actually go out there and proactively, purposely engage with bad actors and try to gather as much information as they can about the scheme and the bad actors themselves, so then we can go out and identify them in the real world. And they have toolings that they create, even as in-depth as fake bank accounts, that we'll use to go out there and try to identify who's behind these schemes and hold them accountable. And in some cases, that even turns into real-world field investigations, where we're going out in the field and trying to identify the locations of bad actors through investigators, all over the globe. So we take a very proactive, aggressive approach in trying to protect consumers through our enforcement programs, and identify who's behind these schemes, because ultimately the criminals behind these schemes are the ones that need to be held accountable to get justice for the victims of these scams. Next slide. And here are just a few of the recent successes we've had. You'll see that the Amazon Microsoft partnership I highlighted here, as well as some lawsuits that we filed regarding scams targeting authors, and some sentencing that was done here in the United States against someone domestically that played a role in a big transnational call center fraud. Next slide. So in addition to the actual legal law enforcement referrals and lawsuits that we file, we also work to take down the infrastructure that scammers use to perpetuate scams. So over the last year, we took down 55,000 different phishing websites, which are sites that are used to fish for credentials that are then used to scam people, as well as 12,000 phone numbers that are used in the impersonation scams. Specifically, these were used in Amazon impersonation scams targeting consumers or Amazon customers. Next slide. So in addition to the aggressive proactive enforcement we take and partnering with law enforcement, we also are working to ensure that customers really know it is us when we communicate with them. Next slide. So one of the ways to do that is by viewing all of the messages that you receive in the message center. So if a customer ever receives a message and they're unsure whether it's really Amazon or not, what they can do is go to the message center and try to view their messages in there. And if the message isn't included in the message center, it's not from Amazon, right? So it's a very quick, easy way to verify that the information that you have is actually us. And if it's not in the message center, it's not us, and you should ignore it. Next slide. So another tool that we've put in place to protect consumers is the implementation of industry-leading email verification. So when a customer receives an email from Amazon, it should be from Amazon.com and also have the smile logo. If it has a smile logo and it's from Amazon.com, then it's from us, and consumers can be confident that they're actually communicating with us. And currently, this is in place in 20 different countries, and we're working to implement it even wider than that. So again, look for the smile logo and make sure that the email is actually from Amazon.com. As we've heard earlier, common misspellings in the actual domain are ways that you can tell that it's a scam. Next slide. So in addition to making sure customers know it's us and proactively enforcing against bad actors, we also, the third pillar we also undertake is educating customers to avoid scams. Next slide. And we do that through a variety of different means, one of which is providing information on our website that customers can go to verify that the communication or the information that they're being provided on the phone is actually from Amazon, or if it's not, that it's a scam. One of the things that we tell customers that I think is so important to reiterate that Kathy mentioned, and again, it's worth saying one more time, is that creation of a false sense of urgency is the most effective tactic that scammers use to victimize consumers, right? They create a situation where you're not looking at things through the same lens that you would if it was under a calm, normal circumstance. And so the ability to take a pause and disengage is so important. And when you do that, you have time to actually go back and check the resources that are available to you, such as the ones that we offer here on Amazon.com. And you can review and make sure that you're actually engaging with Amazon. Next slide. We also partner with a lot of different organizations to provide just-in-time education. And this is because scammers are constantly changing and changing tactics and evolving in the means that they use to engage with consumers. And as we put new controls in place, as we educate consumers on one type of scam, they're always evolving to something new and that's not currently on our radar to try to stay one step ahead. So it's important that we provide consumers with up-to-date, real-time information as fast as we can, so that they can arm themselves and make sure to protect themselves. And so we do that through Amazon Scam Trends, which is covered by a lot of different news agencies and social media sites, where we provide just-in-time and real-time notifications of the most prevalent scams currently affecting consumers. Next slide. All right, and we also partner with many different organizations. Obviously, Kathy mentioned we partner with the AARP on several different initiatives. We also partner with the Better Business Bureau. We help them develop their scam tracker and scam survivor toolkit. And we view this as a critical way to engage with consumers, is partnering and making sure that we're providing the most up-to-date real-time resources to protect consumers and make sure that they can educate themselves. And if they do fall victim, make themselves whole again. Next slide. All right, and as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, this is a link to Amazon's Report a Scam reporting page. And I'll just emphasize again the importance of reporting. Because these happen off of our store and don't involve the use of Amazon store, we don't have any insight into the scams until consumers report it to us. And not only does that give us an idea of what scams are most prevalent, what is the situation that consumers are affecting or experiencing that we need to educate the public about, it also gives us the ability to investigate those. And just so everyone is aware, each scam report really does have the potential to make a difference. And I think sometimes there's a misconception that one scam report won't make a difference and it's not important because we won't be able to do much with one report. But just an anecdotal example of the opposite being true. We had a situation where one victim reported a scam to us. We were able to speak with her, and based on that single scam report, we were able to investigate and build a case that we referred to Indian law enforcement. And that case not only resulted in the prosecution and arrest of the bad actors of that particular scheme, they're actually currently in trial right now being held accountable for the scheme based on a single report from a single customer. And so it really is important to take the time to do that and provide us with as much information as we can so we can use that to proactively not only get justice for the scammers, but use it to protect other consumers to hopefully prevent them from being victimized in the way others may have been. Next slide. And moving forward, this is a priority issue for us, and these are our priorities within this field, right? Continuing to deliver timely alerts and customer education, elevating our victim support, improving reporting, increasing ease of information sharing, and establishing consistent communication practices. As I said, this is something that we're fully committed to and will continue to prioritize, as protecting consumers for Amazon is a top priority and something that we're fully committed to. Next slide. All right, And here's my email address if anyone has any questions or would like further information.
Thank you so much, Tom, for the great presentation and for driving home the point of how important it is to complain. Thank you. Monica, we are, let's plan on going about 6 minutes. We'll go over about 5 or 6 minutes to get some of the questions in from the audience. Monica, I'm sure we have quite a few, so let's try to do a few if we can.
Yeah, we do. That sounds good. Thanks. I'll start with one question that notes that we've all learned that we shouldn't we shouldn't reveal the obviously sensitive information like our social security cards, our date of birth, a PIN or a password. Is there other information that we should warn consumers to protect that might not be so obvious, but that could be used by scammers? And this can be for Emma and Rhonda, but anybody can weigh in.
Hi, this is Rhonda. One thing I'll mention is any information that you share, say on social media, or let's say you strike up a friendship with someone who reached out to you on WhatsApp. One thing to be aware of is that scammers are really sophisticated and they're really good at seeming like they share your interests. So you have kids, your kids go to this school, you work a certain type of job, you play a certain sport, you're really into this hobby. Well, guess what? They're going to be really into that too. And they're going to reflect what you tell them and what you post online back to you. And it's one of the tactics to get people to trust scammers and end up in a position where they're sharing even more information and especially more money. So you definitely don't want to share your social security number, numbers off of your credit card or gift cards or anything like that. But just be aware that any personal information that you post or that you tell someone in a messaging app, for example, is something that they can use to get more information and money from you later.
Okay, thanks. Kathy, is there a comprehensive, publicly available database you would recommend that lists known scam techniques and red flags to help consumers stay vigilant? And the other speakers might also have some to contribute, but.
Well, I think the best place to go is the Federal Trade Commission, and I'm pretty sure their 2024 data will be released pretty soon. But if you just Google, and I'll tell you the exact one, but if you just Google FTC Tableau, you can look for one of the data visualization sections on fraud reports, and you get a lot of really good information there. But they also do a lot. You should be signing up for the FTC alerts that come to email. AARP has the same. If you go to aarp.org/FraudWatchNetwork, most of what you're going to see initially are articles that our writers and editors are posting at least weekly on what's happening. And then if you scroll down a little bit, there's something we call the Fraud Resource Center that has maybe 80 tip sheets on all these common scams, what they look like and what the red flags are. So there's a lot of information out there, but signing up to get it might be the way to go. So sign up for the FTC alerts. You can sign up for the AARP watchdog alerts at aarp.org/FraudWatchNetwork.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Have it come right into your inbox.
Yeah.
Tom, continuing on from your message or your mention of Amazon scam trends, we've got a question about how we can stay ahead of emerging scam tactics and what role technology can play in combating scams early on. And are there any specific tools or software that can help individuals or organizations detect scams in real time?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm not in a position to really recommend specific software that can be used at this point, but I would say, making sure to stay up to date on some of the publications that we've already talked about is probably one of the most effective ways to make sure that you're being vigilant about staying ahead on scams. There's a lot of online publications, the FTC, the FBI, organizations like AARP, the BBB, even Amazon's communications, look to really give consumers, insight into what the emerging trends currently are. And so I would say just take the time to make sure that you're educated. I think one of the biggest things to avoid, and this is really for anybody, is thinking that you're immune from scams and that you would never be someone that could fall victim to scams. We've heard that from so many different people, and it really is irrespective of age, education, location. It's been said throughout this presentation, anybody can be victimized by a scam, and these scammers are very, very good in their social engineering techniques and can really adapt them to to fit what they can tell is important to you. And so I think whenever something doesn't feel right, and this is kind of irrespective of the type of scam, and this is pretty much goes, I would say, for most private sector's company, when anything doesn't feel right at all, right? If something feels off, just disengage, right? Hang up. If it's over the phone, delete the email and contact the company a different way. You can always, if it's a legitimate communication, they will be happy to take your call back. They'll be happy to re-engage with you. You're never going to make a company upset. No one's going to yell at you for disengaging with them. So when that becomes kind of the way that some of these communications are going, it's really important just to disengage and give yourself the space to kind of think clearly and let your emotions calm down. And so kind of irrespective of the scam type, whether it's AI or over the phone or text message or email, just take a minute, disengage, take a break from what you're doing, and then come back, and you can look at some resources or re-engage with the company through their official means. But don't feel pressured, I would say, is the best advice that I can give on that end.
Yeah, that's a reminder we can't hear too often. The next question is for the FTC, because you mentioned or you presented that credit cards are a huge source of losses in scams. And Tom, since your company is both has its own credit card and accepts credit cards, the question is, how involved and committed to collaborating to thwart scam-related payments are credit card companies, since that payment method is such a major source of scam losses? And we're talking about collaboration today.
This is Rhonda. One thing I'll mention, oh, go ahead, Tom. I see you on camera. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to mention, without mentioning specific names, I think what you find is that a lot of private financial institutions that offer credit cards are incredibly interested in scam prevention as well. And we partner with many of them to try to, investigate and collaborate on this type of work. So yes, this is certainly something that requires industry-wide collaboration, and there's certainly one of the segments that has been involved, at least from our standpoint.
And one thing I was going to mention, this is Rhonda again, I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we know that not everyone maybe necessarily bank or have the option, but if folks do have credit cards and are able to pay that way, you are more likely to get your money back, because beyond collaboration, under the law, credit card companies provide consumers with certain rights in terms of, for example, what are called chargeback disputes. So if you make a charge on your credit card, you have certain rights to be able to challenge it, and you're more likely to get your money back than, say, if in some of these awful scams we're seeing now, someone pulls up and tells you to put cash in the trunk of a car, or tells you to deposit money into a Bitcoin ATM. So that's one of the reasons we recommend paying that way, so people are more likely to get their money back.
Yeah, this is Emma. That's absolutely right. And, I always think it's good news to see that credit cards are the top payment method, because consumers do have those protections.
Right. Well, I know we are a bit over, so maybe this question is the one to end on, and it's for all of you, but what are the most effective methods for a nonprofit to educate local communities about scams, particularly those with limited access to technology and also limited English? And related to that at the end, perhaps, Kathy, they also asked if the AARP is only available for a certain age group and if your phone line staff is available in languages other than English. So
I can
Kathy.
speak, yeah, I can speak to the latter. Yes, it's available to anybody of any age. You don't have to be an AARP member. And I think our intake can work with 256 languages. So yes, it's multilingual.
Great. And any other advice about the best ways to educate local communities, particularly with limited access to technology and limited English?
Well, if you're in a community organization where you're out talking to people, bringing people together, sign up for the FTC's resources, sign up for the watchdog alerts. And when you get together, have the conversation. We need a national conversation about fraud. We can't just tell our older adults to, hey, don't answer the phone, without the context of this is the #1 crime in the country and we need to help each other. So it's about having the conversation, talking about it, talk about the specific scams, and that it is such a ubiquitous crime.
And I'd like to add one thing if I could. This is Rhonda again. And I know I'm sure we have a lot of consumer advocates on the line and people who do direct services in communities. And what we found in our work and from partnering with different organizations is some of it is really dependent on the group that you're working with. So for some folks culturally, handing out a brochure may not necessarily be as effective as having an in-person meeting with leaders in that community. For some, it might be doing presentations at a local church in language if you can. And we have in our slides, the FTC has information at ftc.gov/languages in a lot of the most spoken languages in the US. So figuring out what works for that particular community, perhaps radio ads are effective for that group, and speaking with leaders in those communities about what's effective for the folks that you work with. How can we best partner with you to make sure we're getting out effective messages in the way that's helpful for people to receive them, we found to be very effective.
And this is Emma. Another approach might be to try to cultivate relationships with media organizations that serve these communities, Spanish language, radio, TV, that sort of thing. You can reach a lot of people that way, and the media seems to have an insatiable appetite for reporting on scams. So if you have a story to share from your community, trying to get it out there that way, it's a way to reach a lot of people.
All right, well, thank you for staying over to answer those questions. Nelson, back to you.
Yes, thank you so much, speakers. Those are incredible tips you are providing. We have everyone, you'll get a recording link to this, so you can use it, use the information to educate the community you serve. We want to remind everybody that we are a nonprofit, and we always welcome contributions from organizations, from individuals. So you'll get this information on how to do that if you'd like. And then again, the recording link will be sent to everybody, but the videos, our webinars, etc., end up on our YouTube page. We want to take the opportunity to remind everybody to follow us on social media and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You'll get the links for this later. Also, stand by before you totally sign off. There is a quick survey at the end, so we'll go ahead and let you do that as soon as we leave. Thank you again, speakers. We hope to see you again at the speakers. We hope to have you back soon because you brought so much information. And attendees will have you hopefully attend a future webinar in the next few weeks. I'll say goodbye for now. Thank you so much. Look forward to doing more with you. Thank you.